The gentlewoman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief. I have to say, Mr. Moore, you've argued here that there is insufficient evidence to prove that you knew that your employer, Ms. Waters, had a personal financial interest, but I believe that the actions that you took subsequent or in the context of these meetings and email exchanges really strains the notion of credibility, that you didn't know or should not have known about her interest. And in particular, Ms. Waters' direction to you to stay out of it, any suggestion which you affirmed on your record before our outside counsel that you thought that only meant one day, simply strains credibility. And it's clear to me that Ms. Waters knew that she had a conflict of interest, that she made it clear that she understood that she spoke to the then chairman of the committee to separate herself from the matter, and that she directed you to stay out of it. And you ignored your employing member. And so I would ask, if I'm sitting, as I'm listening to you, I'm wondering that if we were to accept your conclusion that to stay out of it only meant one day, we would have to then go back and reconsider whether Ms. Waters in fact did provide the kind of supervision that she's obligated to provide.
Sure.
I don't find that, because I find her direction to you and the reiteration of that by several sources very credible, which is why your statements, both here and in our record, strain so much credibility that I believe that you either knew or should have known by September 19th that there was a conflict of interest by your employing member.
Okay, so let me address that in a couple ways. The first way I would address it is that you said that I ignored my member's direction. The outside counsel has established that we can establish when that conversation happened. I mean, that's just a fact of the record. And so I think it's difficult for me to accept the idea that I ignored a direction when we haven't established the timeline. Secondly, I would again suggest that in my view, and I could be wrong, in my view, that the two emails that are referred to, even after that direction, do not violate that direction if they happen after that. To send an email that says OU is in trouble, and to forward especially to Mr. Frank's office, who was the person who, according to everyone, is designated to work on behalf of this entity. If I would have communicated with with Treasury or FDIC or someone and asked them to do something on behalf of One United, I think that it would be a different conversation. But again, I have to continue to go back to the timeline issue, because I think it's very important in establishing that timeline to establish whether or not a directive was ignored, and then we have to talk about what actions were taken after that.
Well, like Mr. Latourette, it is not important to me as a consideration whether you were successful or you approached the right entity to evaluate whether you knew or should have known about a conflict. And again, and perhaps we will have this deliberation, if we were to accept your conclusion, I think that we would have to revisit the conclusion that we've already made, or that is in the report, as to Ms. Waters' adequate supervision of you. And Mr. Chairman, I will leave it at that.
If I may respond to that,
yes,
really quickly. The first thing that I would say is that I've already on the record today acknowledged that it may have been poor judgment for me to take that as an interpretation. I am in no way trying to say that the Congresswoman did not give clear direction when that direction was given. So I just want to be clear to the committee that I've acknowledged on the record that I may have exhibited poor judgment if my interpretation was that I should do it just for that one day. I've acknowledged that. So there's not a question about that directive. But the remaining question still remains, and I would ask any member or staff or outside counsel to affirmatively establish when the conversation happened and that I ignored that conversation. And that is something that the record is replete that says did not happen. And so I think that my concern is that the committee has laid out 3 substantive violations: that I used the office for my own personal gain, that I dispensed special favors, and that I brought discredit on the House without establishing the facts. And I think that's problematic.
The